Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's panel discussion on energy and transportation. On behalf of the producers of the 10th Annual Green Screen Environmental Film Festival, we welcome all of you. A warm welcome to our esteemed panel of leaders, Hasani Taylor, Onika Morris-Alleyne, and Mandilee Newton. And we invite as much audience participation tonight as possible as we move through the films and the following conversation on our nation's future. Thank you all so much for being here. This year's festival is being hosted with the support of lead sponsor, the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, and supporting sponsor, SwimCall, as well as patron Film TT. Let's begin with our three films. Let's hear a little bit about them. First, we have Methane, directed by Jason Marcano, Very Short Shorts finalist, 2019. And the film features content speaking to waste not, want not, how food waste in turn wastes energy and produces methane, a greenhouse gas. Second, we'll have Changes, directed by David Paris, Very Short Shorts finalist from 2018. This short film uses narrative poetry to explore changes to our rivers and seas in Trinidad and Tobago. And then lastly, we'll have Our Changing Climate, produced by Sustain TNT. This will be an animated short on how humanity's energy use is impacting our changing climate. Now on to our films.
Right through me asking me for phone card, girl. I sent $5 to your phone yesterday. I was sending a car for your girl. Hold on there.
Trinidad and Tobago is my home. And growing up in such a place, where joy was written on our face, and where people gave more than they took, and kindness was an endless book, and everywhere that one would look were our rivers and oceans. Now those same waters wash our shores, but now it's filled with different stores. It's as if what was is now no more, and something has changed just from our core. Ever since the corporations, there's been no such thing as cooperation, and no consideration for the nation as we contribute to the situation. Our waters run red with our blood, mixed with the rubbish causing our rivers to flood. It really isn't hard to see what happened to the place I used to be. It seems the only thing that remained are our rivers and oceans.
Our world changes constantly. Pay attention long enough and you will see the seasons change from dry to wet. The Earth's climate is also changing, but not always in ways that you can see. The average temperature of our Earth is getting warmer as we continue to put gases into the atmosphere that trap heat, mostly through the burning of fossil fuels. Cooking gas, heating gas, planes, trains, cars, factories, even lawnmowers operate on fossil fuels. Warmer temperatures are creating conditions for more powerful storms. Our Caribbean region has been experiencing more severe storms in the past 10 years. Hurricane Ivan in 2004 cost the Cayman Islands billions of dollars in damages and lost revenue. Higher temperatures also cause seawater to heat up slightly, and small temperature changes such as these in the sea can have devastating effects on marine life, especially our coral reefs. These changes are happening because the Earth's land, air, and water are all connected to its climate. So what can we do? Preserve wetlands that can store water and protect coastlines. Improve drainage systems. Avoid building homes in flood-prone areas. Avoid the overdevelopment of hillsides and the displacement of valuable soil-protecting tree cover. Take action.
Welcome back, everyone. So without further ado, let's meet this evening's panel. We'll start with Hasani Taylor. Hasani has spent the past, lovely, a little bit about Hasani. That's okay, we're all excited to be here, so. Hasani has spent the past 5 years working in the extractive industries and is currently a project geologist at Geosim Consulting Limited. He maintains a keen interest in the continued shift to clean energy, the impact on the extractive industries globally, and its effects locally and regionally. He holds a BSc in geology from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and is currently pursuing an MSc in geoinformatics at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. Welcome, Hasani.
Thank you for having me.
Most welcome. Next, we have Onika Morris-Allen. Onika is a transportation engineering, planning, and policy professional with 15 years of experience in mobility and sustainable transport, and a lifetime's interest in placemaking and urban design. She holds a BS in civil engineering from Howard University, an MSc in sustainable transport and travel planning from Loughborough University, and she is currently pursuing a PhD at the University of the West Indies. Her research is focused on street design and urban development outcomes in small island developing states. Her career has included roles in public transportation planning and management, infrastructure development and project management, strategic analysis and planning, operations research and management, urban transportation policy development and planning. She is a registered transportation engineer with the Board of Engineering of TNT and a member of the TNT Society of Planners and the Association of Professional Engineers of TNT. Welcome, Onika.
Good morning, everybody.
And last but certainly not least, we have Mandilee Newton. Mandilee is an award-winning architect in practice for 19 years, exploring and refining the principles of sustainability. For the past 8 years, she has served as Sustainability Director at ACLA Architecture. As one of the first leadership in energy and environmental design accredited professionals in the Caribbean, she is a founding member and past president of the Trinidad and Tobago Green Building Council. Mandilee likes to refer to herself as an earthling and a climate enthusiast. Welcome, Mandilee.
Good evening. Thank you, Giselle.
I am your host and moderator, Giselle Carr, and let's get right into it. So as you know, tonight's panel is going to focus on transportation and energy. So TNT's current energy consumption and our patterns of consumption, as well as our anticipated future energy use. Could each of you comment on whether you think it's sustainable and why?
Okay, I'll go first. I don't believe that it's sustainable. Simply because we've seen over the past decade a decline generally in our oil production and a decline in demand for oil and gas related products across the globe. We've entered into a situation where COVID-19 has exacerbated the decarbonization of the energy industry. And so people are shifting towards more renewable resources, and we do not have the means to, not the means, sorry, but we are behind in our usage of renewable energy. And so I feel like we need to bring ourselves up to the forefront and, engage a little bit more with what is happening globally to continue and to become sustainable in this current energy climate.
Certainly. Onika
Well, I
or
guess,
Mandilee?
well, I guess I'll go next. I don't believe that our current usage of energy is sustainable either in an environmental sense or in an economic sense. The way that we utilize energy, because we don't pay the true price of it in any way, not in financial way, not in societal way. We don't pay the true cost of energy. So of course we overconsume, and that's not a sustainable position to be in any regard. Like I said, not environmentally, because of the environmental impacts of this kind of overconsumption, and definitely not financially, as the whole global energy mix and things are changing. We can't continue going on the way we've been going on because we're going to run out of fuel.
So I don't agree that it is sustainable as yet, but I do believe that we have a choice to make. Since we've started measuring our energy use per capita, Trinidad's energy use rate has not reduced compared to some of our other benchmarks. Whereas we have seen some of our neighbors reduce their energy use per capita, Trinidad has maintained a consistent use per capita, and I think they're still at the second in the world for energy use per capita. And even though we could have the conversation that we have to look at a global sort of position in terms of its overall impact in the bigger pool, the fact that the use per capita is so high is still a very telling sign. And we have to change the conversation now. We know that we're high energy consumers and it is not sustainable. But the fact that it is not sustainable will push us, towards thinking about it more critically and hopefully finding some solutions.
Yes, definitely. I think so as well. I would hope so. What do you think are the most pressing challenges in this area? What do you foresee as the big challenges?
I think our subsidized electricity cost is definitely a negative influence and factor. I think it leads to wastefulness. I think it leads to us taking energy use for granted and whereas removing subsidies is quite a controversial matter. I do think that for the greater good, we have got to find a way to leverage removal of the subsidies over time to pay the true cost of energy. And, as a consequence, it should assist us in becoming more aware and more efficient towards our, with our attitudes towards energy use, for sure. That's one area where I see room for improvement.
Hasani or Onika? Pressing
For
challenges.
Well, I am the transportation expert, so I'm always going to say that transportation is one of our most pressing challenges, and in this case, it definitely is. Not just because, sorry, globally, transportation is one of the greatest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and this is a global thing. And I believe I read a statistic somewhere recently about Trinidad and Tobago's per capita GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. They're extremely high. Um, we have subsidized ICE engines, that's internal combustion engines, and the fuels that support internal combustion engines for a long time. That is now starting to fall away, but we are not pushing, I think, strongly enough, because it's not just about utilizing different kinds of vehicles. That helps, but it's also about looking at the entire picture of transportation, miles traveled or kilometers traveled. Overall, and looking at how we can reduce that as well as reducing our actual use of greenhouse gases. So it's an all-inclusive kind of picture.
Okay.
Hasani.
Oh no. Oh, sorry. So I believe that we also need to encourage and educate the younger generations, because people in my generation, I'm 28, and we're more environmentally conscious, but the younger generations, while they are growing up and understanding that this is what we need to do, they need to see examples being set amongst some of the people who are in office and in higher positions, to show them that it is important to embrace renewable energy and be less wasteful, like Mandilee would have mentioned. But one of the good things that I've seen recently is that the government has recently announced a solar project in Piarco and Trin City and Cuba, I believe, that is set to produce energy on par with electricity costs locally now. So that is a positive note, and within the general framework.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's excellent news. I think, we have so much available energy, sources, right? Renewable sources. There's also
Exactly.
coastal, waves, hydro. Yeah. So it's good to hear about that. More specifically to each of your realms, right? Because I think we also want to cover things like building energy consumption, particularly with you, Mandilee, I think, because your background. Maybe you could speak to some of the ways that you've been overcoming challenges in that area to basically have better energy consumption patterns or encourage some of the behavioral changes that you mentioned.
Right. So just to go back to Onika's point a little, whereas we can focus on building design, certainly that is a big impact. But looking at transportation leads us to this whole conversation around society. So, if we had better planned cities, for example, we wouldn't have to rely on gas-powered transportation as much. If we lived close to where we worked, our footprint would be a fraction of living in a suburb, say, and driving an electric car to work. So we tend to look at solutions such as electric cars as perhaps harbingers of what's to come. But if we really critically analyze the situation and look at environmental responsibility as social responsibility, it will certainly shift the conversation. And certainly buildings are a big part of that. Buildings are responsible for perhaps 70% of energy use, and we try to do everything we can, to reduce energy consumption in building. But if we don't fix the social aspect, we can have carbon zero buildings or net zero buildings, but if your staff of 100 is commuting to work each day, sitting in traffic for 2 hours each day to get to the office, then what are we really trying to solve?
I
Yeah.
completely agree there. Completely agree.
Yeah,
I
on
mean,
the lifestyle change. Sorry, go ahead, Onika. There's a small
no,
delay.
no, no. I mean, Mandilee and I mean, we've talked about these things before through different avenues, and we always come back to this thing that, and this is the universal truth sort of about transportation. Like, you can't separate or divorce transportation from urban design, from how people live, from all these kinds of things, because transportation, very rarely do people use transportation for no reason or for its own sake. It's always in the aid of them living their lives or getting from one place to another to do something that they want to do. And so the idea of bringing these things closer together or doing them in such a way that they can be done. And I mean, people always talk about things like telecommuting, which we're doing a great experiment with in Trinidad and Tobago now, thanks to COVID. So things like telecommuting, things like public transportation, these things are always part of the equation. But I mean, that's only part of it. The real part of it really is how we have organized in space, in space, how we organize our lives and how we organize the society in space. That's really it.
Are there any success stories you want to share, like examples you've seen globally or regionally that have a comparable climate to us or similar problems that you would say they've solved it really well?
I mean, the problem's universal, and it sort of goes back to a thinking and planning that happened around, the post Second World War period, where this idea of before the post Second World War period, where there was all this money in the societies, the societies that were successful at the end of the Second World War, people used that money to just give themselves a ton of individual personal space. And in that, we lost public space, we lost that closeness that we used to have in communities and cities. And when I speak about closeness, I'm speaking about physical closeness. So cities spread out, right? So this is not something that's just unique to Trinidad. This is a universal problem that the world has been gradually moving back towards more compact, more people-centered kind of living situations and life situations. And that's one of the things, some of the examples, there's so many different ways to do this. One of the examples that people always reach for is like the Barcelona superblocks. That's an example that people always reach for, and that's a great example. But there's so many different ways to do this, but the principle is always the same. Bring people where they live, where they work, and where they recreate and get services, bring them within a certain sort of a radius. And that's how you create the magic that is required to really reduce the energy consumption through transportation.
Yeah, shift the focus from me to we, basically, moving to the goals of the whole
Yes, yes.
community rather than just the
Correct.
individual. Yeah.
Correct. And I mean, I know that the world has shifted back and forth between this individualized idea and this collectivist idea. And it's not that either of those is necessarily wrong, but it's just that the balance always shifts between the two. And right now, I think we're in a period of sort of an imbalance. And we're working to get towards, striving to get back towards a balance.
Hasani, your take on this?
Well, I feel like considering all of the different mechanisms that we have to reduce our fossil fuels consumption, sorry, including electric vehicles and better building practices, we have to consider that these materials, while they provide us a cleaner alternative to fossil fuels, they're also not finite. I mean, they're also finite, sorry. So the materials that are used to create solar panels and the batteries for these electric vehicles are what they're referred to as rare earth metals. And they are finite resources that exist in very few places around the globe. One of the primary producers would be China. I think they produce about 80 to 95% of the rare earth metals. And those are used in everyday items, from lights to the screens that we're talking on now, cell phones, car batteries. So it's important to consider that, while energy may be deemed clean, the consumption patterns of human beings need to also be checked, because without reducing our consumption and the way that we consume, we're still heading in the same direction as we are now using fossil fuels. I feel like recycling is extremely important. in that regard, because almost 1 billion cellular devices and smart devices are thrown away every day. I mean, not every day, every year, sorry. And we need to consider that we need to recycle these so that we could create a closed loop system so that solar panels and EVs work to our benefit and not to our detriment.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. It's like the old, was it Captain Planet thing? Reduce, reuse,
Yeah,
recycle. That's like a thing. It's like a mandate I think we should be living, that we should be living for the modern age. Reduce, reuse, recycle. That's really it. Like, and everything sort of fits into that paradigm.
Yeah, I think
yeah,
it's
definitely.
key. Yeah. I love the idea that it comes back to the individual making the choice. I mean, yes, it's the collective, but just, it's our choices, that add up, especially when it comes
Definitely.
to things like like I never really considered the source of the materials for so-called renewable energy also being an issue, because
Yeah,
I think so many of us kind of find this comfort and safety in it, but really we have to change our patterns of
exactly.
behavior. We have to change how we live.
Exactly. It's almost like people feel better about themselves. I mean, and it's okay to feel good about yourself if you're, embracing a cleaner way of living, but everything needs to be considered in the global sense of the idea, and without tampering down our own consumption patterns. Like I said, it leads to the same end result.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
For sure. And there's this it's so strange, Giselle, that you talked about individual consumption patterns and individual habits and those kinds of things, because while those things are important, when we look at the data and we look at the statistics, we're seeing that individual consumption, individual patterns only have such a small they have a significant, yes, but a small impact on what's happening. We tend to say, well, the companies that produce these kinds of things and the ways that they behave depend on our consumption patterns. And while to some extent that is true, corporate waste, corporate destruction make up for a lot of the actual problem that we have here. So while individual behavior is always crucially important. I mean, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that even if every single of the 1.3, we know it's probably more than that at this point. Every single
Yeah.
one of the 1.3 people in Trinidad and Tobago change their consumption patterns overnight, it still won't make a dent, if you understand what I mean. So this is we have to maintain that, yes, these things are important, and they're important for so many reasons, including making our own individual society better. But if we're looking at a global picture, we're talking about something that's much bigger than even every single individual. The collective is truly bigger than the sum of its parts in that regard.
So there
Well,
needs to
let's.
be a policy shift, Onika. We need
Absolutely.
a policy shift, and we need new economic models that look at extraction in a different way, Giselle. So to change the chain of supply from a linear pattern from extraction to waste, and shift it back to a closed loop supply where extraction eventually feeds back into the system, much like the way an ecosystem functions. It's a closed cycle, a closed loop cycle, and there's very little waste because whatever is extracted is returned in some way. And we can look at it from a consumption point of view, but if the policy isn't in place and if we don't shift our economic models away from heavy extraction, then it's going to be market driven. It's going to be demand and supply, supply and demand. And I get it brings me back to this point about environmental justice and social justice being integrally tied together. It's the only way we're going to become environmentally conscious is if we look at society in a more equitable manner, and vice versa. When we start to look at society in a more equitable manner, environmentalism will become, more second nature. I used to believe that the earth was overpopulated, and perhaps it is, but now it's becoming more and more clear that it's not just consumption due to overpopulation, because the wealthiest, 1% is responsible for 50% of the earth's carbon emissions. So it's a shift in our thinking towards social justice and equity.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's also the legal frameworks, right? Because I believe there's this huge movement to pass ecocide law, so basically declaring environmental degradation as a criminal international law, or international crime, basically. But I fully agree that we really have to consider or reconsider just the entire way that we live and our societies function, so our economics. Hassan, you have anything to say on that?
Well, like I mentioned before, it's important to reduce our consumption. But what COVID-19 has shown us in this new normal is that, first of all, it's possible to exist without the patterns of consumption that we've previously enjoyed. And secondly, we can adapt. Human beings adapt all the time to different factors, and not being able to go out, not being able to travel has not prevented the world from moving forward. We have adopted this mindset where it's like hustle and bustle, go go go, and this exponential growth model is not sustainable. And COVID-19, like I said, has shown us that it's possible to reduce our patterns of consumption, reduce our travel, have a meeting on Zoom instead of taking a plane and going to a different country. And yeah, I think that as human beings, we need to understand that the world that we live on is not going to be here forever if we continue living the same way that we do. And yeah.
The world will be here, Hasani, but we might not be.
I was just about to say
You're
that,
going to be
Mandilee.
obliterated.
The world will go on. Whether we are here to see it is debatable.
Yeah, our fossils will be here, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to lean back into this the bit of the conversation that was around corporates because very recently, a major energy company declared that it wants to be net zero by 2050. Right, and we had this chat before. I'm not going to name the
Right.
energy company, right? But what kind of repercussions do you see something like that having? Do you see other industries potentially taking that kind of step? I mean, I wholeheartedly agree about the corporations' footprints being so huge. And I'm just curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Like, what you see the impacts are going to be.
Well, first of all, I think they're not being ambitious enough. I always feel like people can always do better. You know what I mean? So I feel like to say net zero by 2050, I don't think it'll take 30 years. I think what they want to do is to be able to extract another 30 years worth of profits while they look like they're doing something. but, but that's just the way I tend to see these things. But I do think that the time for sort of incrementalism in this area has passed. That we're on the edge of kind of an emergency now. I mean, I'm not to be alarmist or anything, but to be alarmist, we're sort of on the edge of things now, and I think that it's time for us to be more ambitious, more we need to take stronger action, I think, and look at shorter timelines in doing these kinds of things because, I mean, we're not going to say what is the company, but I mean, in case of this, I mean, it's all pretty much the same six of one, half a dozen of the other. We're talking about extractive industries that have been earning money for 100, 150 years, utilizing these types of, use these types of extractive methods and everything like that. And it's not at this point, it's not even a question of that all collapsing tomorrow. It's not a question of that. It's a question of people re-evaluating what's actually important. And Mandilee was quite right when she talked about our social responsibilities and environmental responsibilities being tied together and our economics being tied into everything. When the sustainability triangle that they refer to, that economic, social, environmental, sustainability triangle. It's sort of like a cycle as well. And the three things really feed into each other. So you can't really have one without the other two. So if you're looking for environmental sustainability, you are looking at economic and social justice. If you're looking at social justice, you're looking at economic and environmental justice, and so on and so forth. And I think that one of the things that we have to let go of is a certain kind of paradigm. And Hasani spoke about it a little bit, that COVID-19 has showed us just that what we need and don't need, really. I think that's one of the conversations that I think a lot of people have been having. What you need and you don't need, COVID-19 has shown that, it thrown that into stark relief. And I think a lot of the things that we thought we needed, we simply don't need, or we can do with less, or we can do without in this kind of way. There's some things that we think that we need, and the things that we found that we need are each other. That's really what it's come down
Profound.
to. So we need to figure out how to keep that and maybe let go of some of the other stuff. And that doesn't necessarily mean like reducing standards of living or anything like that, because Mandilee, I am with you as well, that I used to think that the earth was overpopulated, but now I just think that it's a balancing problem. It's a resource allocation problem. It's not that there aren't enough resources. It's that the resources are concentrated in one area where the need is in another. And that's something I actually learned from transportation, because that happens, and that's a transportation problem that happens all the time, where there's an oversupply of the resources in one place and a complete dearth of them in another. So that's really it. I think that we should be more ambitious in this time. There's so much more that could be done, and it can be done without harming people. It can be done by helping people, and I think we need to look at it like that.
I'm encouraged by at least, even if it's performative, I'm encouraged that the energy leaders are taking that stand now. But I do agree, it's the 40% rule. There's always more that we can give. We've gone beyond grid parity. So renewable energy is now proven to cost less than fossil fuel generated energy. And we have precedents in Australia and New Zealand and other places that are pushing the boundaries. So it's a business model for them. And the fact that it is becoming a viable business model to shift towards renewables is a good thing, because at the end of the day, corporations are driven by profits, and for better or for worse, that's the model we have right now. And until that shifts, if we can get to the finish line, through another means, I would be happy with it. One of the shifts that will be important as we move away from fossil fuels and towards renewables is biodiversity. We're going to have to find a way to balance out our place as a human species in the bigger chain. Every species reaches a maximum population, and once a species gets to a critical mass, it finds a level and it balances out, for natural sustainability. And it is my hope that with the shift in thinking of the energy companies and extractive industries, it will push us towards a greater appreciation of biodiversity, because one of the things that's coming out of the environmental movement now is that, the degradation in biodiversity is actually, one of the biggest issues that we face. And, depleting our fish populations, our plant populations, our, any other animal but the human animal is actually having, an extremely negative effect on the survivability of our species. So I would like to see that conversation about shifting from fossil to renewable be taken even further, as to how we can reduce our physical footprint in forests and oceans and so on, and enhance biodiversity.
I agree with both points that were made by Mandilee and Onika, but I feel like in saying that it can be done faster, not enough consideration is being made for the stakeholders and the entire framework that exists around oil and gas production. One of the majors taking that step is extremely encouraging, like Mandilee mentioned, and it also represents a pivotal shift in these companies' willingness to discontinue just extracting profits and start considering the environment as a part of everyday life. But I feel like we should also consider the workers that exist in that framework, and allowing them to transfer over seamlessly, finding transferable skills and finding their place in the new energy economy. One of the majors taking the step to disrupt their own business model is is earth shifting, earth shattering, however you want to look at it. You don't usually see that from someone who is established in an industry. You usually see that from newcomers deciding that they want to disrupt and change the way that things are done. When you look at Tesla in the automotive industry, deciding that they want to go down the path of pursuing EVs. And Tesla also is working on battery technology that does not necessarily involve electric vehicles, right? They have supplied battery power to Australia on a large scale for over 80,000 persons, and it's proving rather that an energy company in its new iteration as Tesla is representing has the possibility to shift the way that we live, and the way that other majors behave because of Tesla's innovative actions. We've seen that the majors, I don't want to call anyone's name, but we've seen them take more aggressive stances towards transitioning out of the oil and gas economy and into the new economy.
Yeah, I think we're at this really interesting point in history where we're at the confluence of multiple paradigm shifts. So, I mean, I hear you with the kind of reasoned, logical approach to shifting something as big as the energy industry and just everyone that's involved. Yeah, but I also deeply hear and resonate with the need for urgency. And I really couldn't agree more about the biodiversity value as well. Everything is interconnected. I mean, Mandilee mentioned several species, but there's also the pollinators to consider, and the impact of losing them. So there really are just so many facets to this issue. I mean, maybe you guys could speak a little bit about solutions or ways that you see local innovation stepping up. And again, given this climate of the confluence of paradigm shifts, so we know that we have to change, right? We know that our economy is going to have to change eventually. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about how you would apply this locally, how you see it feasibly and realistically panning out. Because I think it's great to have conversations like this because we get to dream. We get to actually dream into our future, our collective future, and live it. So I'm deeply curious to hear from each of you how you would envision that for Trinidad and Tobago.
On the point of dreaming, I feel like we all need to consider the words of the Honorable Prime Minister of Barbados in that we should pivot. Now is the time to pivot. We have an opportunity now where on a global scale, people are more environmentally conscious. They've been home, they've witnessed what a reduction in emissions can do for the environment, and they are more willing to adopt a better, more progressive lifestyle. Locally, I feel like we can encourage, students. We could shift the curriculum to, more STEM-related subjects and study programs, and encourage younger people to adopt a more progressive approach. We should shift away from creating workers in the traditional sense to, data technologists, data scientists, innovators, and have them do the heavy lifting of innovating for us. To the point that I made previously about adopting recycling as an initiative to create this closed loop system whereby we recycle our solar panels and we recycle our smart devices and our EV batteries. That's something that the government can address immediately by legislation. By increasing their willingness to set up a framework whereby entrepreneurs and younger people can engage themselves in that industry and within that framework.
I think to add to that point, PV manufacturing is energy intensive, and energy is subsidized in a country like Trinidad. We've often thought perhaps the subsidized energy costs could have been leveraged to become a PV manufacturing hub for the region. I think when we're forced to face different realities, we adapt quickly, and COVID has proven that innovation comes quite naturally. I mean, one of my former practice's largest clients, who is a major employer in this country, after COVID hit, suddenly it occurred to them that a work from home policy needed to be formalized. And suddenly there's a lot of churn within their office space. They have, millions of square feet of office space. And it suddenly dawned on them, hang on a minute, we only need about 30% of the office space of our office footprint. And that reduces consumption, reduces the transportation footprint, increases, someone's lifestyle and sense of well-being, not having to commute to and from the office.
Definitely.
Exactly. And, there are things like that. The innovation will come out of social innovation. I mean, I think unfortunately Trinidad has missed its opportunity to leverage its energy costs towards diversifying towards renewables, manufacturing, or what have you. Because I don't know how much longer the subsidies will last. But the thinking towards some kind of social innovation has to happen. And Hasani, you mentioned Barbados. That's where half of my family is from, and this whole model of doing a remote work environment to
Yes.
for tourists, and the economic model is shifting, and we may not be able to use the greatest technology in our buildings, Giselle or Onika, but the social aspect is where I think is key, because we have a very kind of exuberant culture, and we see the innovation annually in Carnival, and it's going to come through the arts and design thinking and social innovation, and maybe we not focus so much on the heavy technology, and try to find other incremental and more subtle ways of creating change and reducing impact, carbon footprint and impact.
Giselle, I'm glad you mentioned dreams because I think that's something that is critical to the whole thing, that we don't dream big. And PM Motley, Hassani brought up PM Motley's speech, and I watched that several times over the last
Yeah.
few days, and it really it has really resonated. My grandfather was a shipbuilding mechanic back when Trinidad used to have a shipbuilding industry, and my mother always tells a story about how an English shipbuilder always used to tell him when he could fix something that the Englishmen couldn't, brains were not invented in the West Indies. I completely disagree. I think that brains were absolutely invented in the West Indies. And just looking around at everything that happens in Trinidad, we are so infinitely creative, and not just in the cultural spaces, but just in general. The Caribbean and Trinidad in particular is such an innovative space, and we don't see it as an innovative space because we don't value that kind of innovation. We don't support it with research and development. We don't support it with capital. We don't support it with anything. We're mired in some of these traditional ideas. And I think that we are missing, because of that, we are missing everything that's out there. I mean, I am a Twitter devotee. And the things that I see coming out of Trinidadians on Twitter, they're fast. You know what I mean? And sharp. And, people are thinking, all these synapses are firing. And I feel like that is something that we have not captured. We haven't figured out how to take that and utilize it. We keep tamping it down. And that's the thing I think we need to stop doing. We need to stop tamping it down. We need to let that innovation, that natural innovativeness that we have in this region, we just need to let it bloom. And I think that when we do that, we'll see all kinds of things happen in this space. We have to stop tamping it down.
Absolutely. Sorry, Hassan, you're about to say something.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that on a positive note. I know, it's easy to get it's easy to be negative. I'm not saying that anybody here is being negative, but it's easy to point out the inefficiencies or the indeficiencies. But we have our most recent government, the most recent government in Trinidad and Tobago, has adopted a policy of encouraging technology and technological innovation. And while it might be a little bit late, as Mandilee pointed out, it's still a bright light in a dark time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It is I have spent a lot of years in the public sector, and I have seen change happen. It's slow, but I've seen it happen. But there has been a little bit of a leap forward lately. I do have to agree with that. And I want to see more of that. You know what I mean? I feel like there's more of that what we could be doing. And I think that one of the things that COVID has brought out is that, okay, now we need to innovate because things are dire, you know? So
Yeah.
I think that COVID it's been awful, but it has also released some things that I think needed to be released in this society.
Maybe you could speak a little more about the things that you're glad to see go, because I think that's true for a lot of people. Like it's been some sort of weird global catharsis in a sense. Like I mean, barring of course the tragedy of the loss of life, right? But yeah, maybe speak about the things that you're glad to see go during this time.
Like in Trinidad, there are some things that I've seen happen in the last 6 months that I would never thought I would see happen in Trinidad and Tobago. You know what I mean? I'm talking about like online business and food delivery, and I mean I've seen like these apps take off. You know what I mean? And every business now is innovating in a particular kind of way to reach its market. Whereas before it was like, well, we'll just sit back and let the market come to us. No, everybody is on the ball these days. You know what I mean? And everybody's reaching out and everybody's engaging and everybody's talking about ways of being more efficient and more effective. And that's the kind of conversation that COVID has sparked. And not just conversation, but action that COVID has sparked. And that energy, I mean, when we hope that COVID leaves soon, but I don't want to lose that energy.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've witnessed is that a lot of the young entrepreneurs are really coming into their own, and developing apps that are providing wonderful solutions for everyday problems that we have been facing since before COVID, but that COVID has kind of brought to the forefront and made us pay attention to. It's too many to list, but there are a lot of apps, and I want to congratulate all of the young local entrepreneurs and regional entrepreneurs as well for the work that they have been doing to bring these things to us and allow us to continue living somewhat of a normal life.
Definitely. Definitely, yeah. There's been such ingenuity in solving some of these problems. I've been shocked. It's almost like they solve a problem you didn't even know you had.
Exactly.
Yeah, just really smoothly. But I mean, it's incredible to see that kind of ingenuity really unleash itself because in the back of your mind, you kind of know it's always there. But to see the situation really bring out the best in people in this way, it's true. It is deeply inspiring. Okay, great.
Oh, yeah.
So we're just about to shift to audience questions. So audience on social and wherever you are, please go ahead and send us your questions. Our first question is about the energy sector on the whole being inefficient. And this person is saying that our electricity efficiency is extremely low. How does an electric car solve the problem? So if anyone would like to comment a bit about electric cars and transportation and how you see this solving things.
I don't see electric cars as solving the problem. I see them as contributing somewhat to the solution. I can't speak to the electricity, the efficiency of electricity generation and all that because that's not my area of expertise. But I will speak to, like I said, one of I follow like a number of urban thinkers and transportation thinkers on Twitter, and one of the things that always comes up is, well, we could just use electric cars, and we're like, that's the second part. The first part is first, let's reduce, let's densify, and then what's left, let's electrify. So it's not a question of replacing every single car with an electric car. That's ridiculous. It doesn't work. It doesn't actually solve a problem. It's because the people talk about, well, it reduces tailpipe emissions. Yeah, but the manufacturing of that electric car creates emissions as well. So you replace every car with an electric car, you move any tailpipe emissions to the manufacturing factory. Not incredibly efficient, but you reduce the number of cars overall and make what's left electric. Or when I say reduce, I mean talking about the whole picture that Mandilee and I were talking about public space and the way that we move around in space and the things that we want to have access to, and looking at how we can do those through, I'm a great advocate of walking, cycling, public transportation. That's my holy trinity, right? So once we get to the point where most of it is walking, cycling, when I'm speaking about walking, I'm speaking about all these sort of, I'm talking about walking, scooters, these kinds of things, right? Walking, cycling, public transportation, and everything in that mix being either people powered or electrified. And that's really it. And then the method of electricity generation as well, because I tell people all the time, I have a personal thing about CNG, which is that yes, useful, not a large scale solution. Because do we really want to be burning natural gas that is it's not infinite, let's put it that way, that we could be utilizing in other means to generate ourselves some kind of income that we could utilize to transform the economy and the society? Do we want to be burning that in 3-hour traffic?
Exactly.
You know? So yeah, so you know what I mean. I'm talking about like a whole paradigm shift. It's not just about transportation. Transportation is just the mechanism, it's the means, but it's a whole mental, societal paradigm shift. So electric cars do not, and you can quote me, electric cars do not solve the problem. They contribute to the solution, some small parts.
I would echo that sentiment. And, just to say a simple example is, drinking too much Diet Coke because you think it's healthier. Yeah? It's not a
Yep.
solution. Definitely not a solution. It certainly softens the impact. But if we have an energy sector that is inefficient, then demanding more energy from that inefficient grid will make the situation worse. And it's not just the energy sector, it's the water supply sector. So one of the things we tend to overlook is that a lot of energy goes into water supply. And if our water supply is inefficient, our energy system is doubly inefficient. TN Tech and, we've sat in on these conversations, historical relationship between gas supply and TN Tech. We've debated with engineers the fact that natural gas is cleaner than oil. I'm sure, yes, it is, but we need to shift the conversation away from doing less harm to doing more good. That is where we need to get to. We shouldn't just be looking at solutions that will soften the blows. We need to look at solutions that will solve the problems. And shifting to EV in Trinidad is not going to solve the problem. There's a greater issue that we need to address in efficiency. It's just like renewable energy. There's no sense putting renewable energy on your building if you're going to be burning through it and using it inefficiently. When you're talking about building design, you wouldn't have all incandescent bulbs in your building and then go put PV panels up on the roof, because you're going to be burning through that renewable energy. You're shifting to LED lights the conversation has to be about efficiency first before you even start to talk about renewables, or in the case of electric vehicles, certainly.
Okay, just a quick note. That question was from Ronald Roach. We're just moving on to the next question from Jalaluddin Khan. And could you comment on the transport planning need of the Toko Highway and the Toko Seaport Bridge within the context of transport planning for Trinidad and Tobago? So maybe we could start with Hasani, since Hasani didn't respond to the last one. So
This is definitely
it's a hot
Onika's
question.
portfolio. But
Okay.
what I will say is, from an economic standpoint, just to increase the viability of economic development in Toko and those regions. People generally tend to consider, why Toko need a road? The real reason is because there are people living in Toko. And there's also the idea that this port will make transportation to and from Tobago easier, But it also has a host of auxiliary industries that build around these ports. There are people who sell things. There are, supply arrangements that can be made in Toko, and there's an economic benefit to building a road to get there, and also to build a port to get to Tobago. More efficient travel is, better for everyone. It doesn't take 4 hours or 3 hours to get to Tobago anymore. It takes 2 hours. That's a benefit.
I will add to that, and I always have nuanced answers to these things that land me in some small amount of trouble. But
Measured amount.
no,
Measured
some measured amount of trouble. No, but I I see it as a positive because one of the things that there's two things to consider. One is the right tool for the job, and one is this idea of shortening travel times. One of the biggest wastes of fuels in particular, and biggest waste of, is spending time getting to where you're going. The more time you spend, the more fuel you burn, right? So one of the I think one of the potential benefits to, and we'll talk about the port first and then the road, that a ferry port in Togo significantly reduces the amount of time it takes to get between Trinidad and Tobago. And in that case, once you reduce the amount of time it takes to get between Trinidad and Tobago, you open up both Trinidad and Tobago in particular ways to particular kind of economic activity. So that's one thing. There are trade-offs that need to be considered, and those trade-offs have to be balanced in a measured way. I think there might be some different ways that some of these things can be done. So I started with the port because from what I can see, the road leads to the port. Because it's one thing to have a port in Togo, it's another one to be able to get there. And to get there again with some efficiency. So I think that I hesitate to use words like good and bad. I think that is a project with potential benefits, useful benefits. I think that there are things that need to be mitigated in actually executing these projects. The environmental factors certainly need to be mitigated. There's all kinds of pitfalls and hazards that come along if you don't do it right. So I don't see it as a bad idea. I think that I hope that it's being seriously, properly thought out.
I think I think development tends to be politicized, right? And even though I'm an architect, I'm a reluctant developer, only because because development is politicized, it's done with expediency. And my view of Toko is very different, perhaps, to someone who's grown up here. I see it as a piece of paradise. And what will that? It comes back to a shift in our thinking towards what economic development is. And you cannot have economic development in a vacuum. Economic development is tied to social development as well. And are we improving the lives of the people in Toko? Or are we improving the lives of the people who want to get from Trinidad to Tobago quickly? And how do we balance that? How do we balance that against biodiversity? How do we balance that against ecotourism? If or should Trinidad decide to push the ecotourist agenda, but we're going to be, ramming a 6-lane highway through Toko or whatever it is, in order to get a port that connects the two islands, then, how can we do that sustainably? That is where I look at it from, not necessarily from, a moral standpoint, but, just a kind of a broader picture of what is the end objective and how do we achieve that with the best end game for everyone.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You're always balancing, when you're looking at development, you're always balancing these things because the society needs things, but it needs a number of different things, if you understand what I mean. And some of those things are in conflict with each other. And if you're going to be doing things in the environment, you need to understand how to balance those things. I talked about transportation thinkers that I follow, and there's one called Jarrett Walker, and Jarrett talks about what we call the plumber's questions. And as a professional, always speak to the plumber's questions, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm here to advise you on the technical things that you don't know about necessarily. But the values that you choose to ascribe to things, I can't tell you how to ascribe those values. I of course have my own opinions, but I can't tell you how to value economic development versus environment. I can tell you what's sustainable in balancing those two things out. I can help you make the decision, but in the end, the values decision has to come from the people. And of course, like I said, I have my own opinion, of course. I always have my own opinion on these things, but I always, because of the environments, like I said, I've been in the public sector for a long time. So that's the thing, that thing Mandilee said about trying to do good before doing less harm, that's a real thing uppermost in my mind at all times. What is good here? And then once we get past what is good, then we go down to what will do less harm, if you understand what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. An exceptionally hot topic, this one. I think it's a very difficult question to answer, so I think everybody brought something unique and sincere. So we're moving to the next question from Catherine Agong, to please ask each of the panelists their opinion on the role of human-powered transport and active travel and the balance between energy use and sustainability.
Ooh. Catherine always get me thinking.
It's got me thinking too.
Yeah. I'm a great believer in human-powered transport. For the vast majority of our history as a species on this planet, we have utilized human-powered transport. I think it's something that we can stand to do more of, just generally, for so many reasons, for our environment, for our economy, for our personal health. So I am all in favor, but that needs to be supported. And one of the things that happens is that it's not supported. And when I say supported, it has to be supported by the infrastructure. It has to be supported. It has to be safe. You know what I mean? It has to, all of these things. So for me, I'm a great walker. I've lived in Trinidad, I've lived in other places. I am a walker. I love to walk. Right? And when I have lived in other places, I've done so much walking. And I come back to Trinidad and I don't feel like I can walk for many reasons. One is a security issue. The other is in some places where I would normally walk, I can't walk because the infrastructure does not support me safely walking anywhere. So we're talking about places where there are no sidewalks, places where the speeds are so high of the vehicles that are whizzing by. I feel like I'd be taking my own life into my hands if I were to walk. In places where the lighting is poor, places where, and then I'm a woman, so they're all a whole other set of considerations that go along with that. So I am a great fan of it. It needs to be supported, and I'm talking about walking, but I mean this equally applies to cycling and all these other low-speed wheeled vehicles. If you don't create the infrastructure and make people feel safe to do it, then they won't do it. And what they will do instead is that they will buy a car.
It's what we do. It's true.
Yeah.
I think Catherine is begging a question there, because to me, there's no, it's a simple solution. Of course, there's a direct relationship between passive transportation and energy use and sustainability. I mean, our dream is to all live in walkable environments. My dream is to not have to own a car. And it just leads to a better, healthier lifestyle as well. It can only lead to a greater appreciation of our environment, for sure. Our reliance on the motor vehicle has crippled our humanity. Obesity and these sorts of health issues are tied to a heavy reliance on motor vehicles. And as I said at the beginning, you can live in a suburb and drive an electric car into the city and still have a much larger carbon footprint than if you just lived in a city where you could walk, or lived in an environment where you could walk, to all of your needs. So direct impact, Catherine, they're married, basically, integral.
I agree with both points that were raised. Specifically to Onika's point, I feel like there needs to be better infrastructure, definitely, to support cycling and other human power transport mechanisms. I recently saw that in Chaguaramas. For those of you who know where Chaguaramas is, they installed a bike lane, which is a positive development. But if we're considering adding human transport to the wider country, I feel like infrastructure definitely needs to catch up, and also legislation, because I remember recently, there have been a couple cyclists that have been hit and lost their life, and clearer protections for cyclists and people who are using the roadways for different types of transport with different types of transportation is necessary to encourage that, so that people feel safe. It's not just about do I feel safe from a crime, but a car provides a certain level of safety in your mind, because you're close, you could lock the door, as opposed to a bike. But are you safe generally where you are? If you get hit, can you defend yourself? Is there legislation to protect you? All of these things.
Okay, so we have a few more questions coming in from Courtney Andrews via YouTube. Is solar the only type of energy shift that you would recommend for TNT and the wider Caribbean? Are there any more you would recommend?
No, there's also wind, wind energy. There's wave energy. We have some serious waves on the East Coast. There is bio, turning your garbage, into energy. You're taking your biomass basically. Even though that does have other implications for exhaust and so on. But no, don't stop at solar. There are many other options.
We've seen up the islands that they have embraced hydrothermal energy, or geothermal energy rather, and that is an important option for countries that have the resources to produce that type of energy. In Trinidad, I feel like one of the things that we can definitely look into is the hydrogen economy, and it's something that I saw mentioned in the roadmap to recovery. We have oil and gas infrastructure that lends itself to engaging in that hydrogen economy. In some way, we're a little bit behind from a research and development standpoint. Hydrogen and the hydrogen economy is not exactly green. It's what we call gray hydrogen, in that it's derived from natural gas, right? And so there are three different levels. There's gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and green hydrogen. Gray hydrogen being those that are derived from natural fossil fuels, but it's emissions intensive. It produces about 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide for every kilogram of hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen that is produced and the carbon is sequestered, and so they store it away and it doesn't enter into the atmosphere. And the green hydrogen is something that would be produced from a renewable electricity source. And so some money can be spent in research and development in getting us to that point. But it's definitely something that is on the table, and it's good. It was good to see it mentioned in the roadmap to recovery, even if it was just, in passing.
Hear you.
I always like to seize on those in passing things, because we so rarely engage in these large scale, and going back to Giselle's word of dreams, these large scale dreaming and visioning exercises. So when I see something like that make it into one of these documents, as far as I'm concerned, that's something that I can take and go running. You know what I mean? Because okay, now you've said it, so I'm gonna take that thing that you have said now, and I am going to run through that door that you are saying is open. And even if the door is only slightly ajar, I'm going to put my shoulder to that door and I'm going to push, because now you have said it. Okay, time to back it up. You know what I mean? So like I said, that I suppose again, that comes from years in the public sector. You take the little chink of daylight that you find and you open up that opening. You know what I mean? So it's in there. Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. Exactly.
Sounds like a good strategy. This is a good strategy.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next question from Alana Marie Gopal. As we saw recently, social media can play a part in rallying support for environmental issues. FSO Nabarima. What do you all think needs to happen for more awareness and action around transportation and energy issues specific to Trinidad and Tobago? Awareness and action.
I think public education is a huge part of things. I think that we don't understand a lot of things. Trinidad and Tobago has been an oil and gas producer for over 100 years. I don't think most people understand how the oil and gas sector work. And yeah, they don't understand where our patrimony comes from, where our money comes from, how any of this works. And I think it's the same for things that everybody uses, but few people truly understand, like transportation. Everybody uses transportation, so everybody has an opinion on transportation. Transportation is a field that is filled with so many counterintuitive ideas. Things that seem to make common sense are actually the opposite of what actually works in some instances. So these counterintuitive things kind of you have to push. You have to sort of push things because you're just like, for example, and this is one I always use, there's a phenomenon called induced demand, where when you widen a road or you create a new road, you think that that's going to solve a congestion problem. But instead, all it does is that new road or that expanded road now just like takes more cars and you end up with the same problem that you have. And I mean, that's been taken to an extreme in a number of places, including, I think there's a 19-lane highway in Texas. And when they expanded it to 19 lanes, it was congested again within a week. You know what I mean? So just so this is the kind of counterintuitive thinking, because you would think, oh, we have a congestion problem, just add more lanes to reduce the congestion. No, it doesn't. So when I talk about public education, I talk about getting those ideas really out into the public imagination, because what happened with the whole Nabarima thing is that people got into the public imagination, and that is, whether or not things were correct, but what you need to do is you need to I'm a believer in teaching. I'm a believer in talking to people. I'm a believer in just being sort of an evangelist for these things and these ideas, and then encouraging people to get involved in this stuff. And, oh, you're interested in this? Well, why don't you read this? Why don't you look at that? Why don't you know what I mean? And by doing that, by building up a lobby of informed people who can then like sort of make a wave, you know what I mean? So you want to, and we have so many tools to do that now, because social media can amplify anything. I would like to use it to amplify good things, you know what I mean? So one of the things, and one of the reasons that I agreed to do this panel is because I thought to myself, well, I'm gonna have an audience. Let me sit here and talk about transportation, and hopefully some people have some interest, and maybe they look into some more things, and maybe that's one way to create a lobby, because people start talking about these things in an informed way, and they have opinions, and they understand the trade-offs, and they can speak to these things in a particular kind of way that makes people who make decisions listen to what they have to say.
I think too there's our cultural attitude towards private motor vehicles could do with some massaging, and that's where perhaps social media comes in. We do need to have campaigns, to desensitize this sort of attitude that we have to owning a private motor vehicle, and along with that, beef up our public transportation. One of my colleagues, Ray Furlong, transportation engineer, says it best. He says people look at public transportation the way they look at public toilets. Nobody wants to use it, and we need
So brutal.
we need a shift in our attitude, as well as building up our infrastructure. And I'm not talking about rapid transit. We have so many examples around the world of bus lanes, and you guys have a priority bus route that's enviable. I mean, it's one of the most magnificent things that you have in this country in your transportation infrastructure. We can build upon these things for sure. When I was growing up, there was a campaign in Jamaica to help manage population control that said two is better than too many. And it worked, and it was blitzed on the evening news and so on. And, but they put infrastructure in place that, they put birth control and education and awareness. And, it was a kind of a concerted effort. And perhaps what our viewer is alluding to is social media is a perfect platform to start to have that ground level conversation while we build up the infrastructure that we need to support this shift in cultural attitude that we do need towards the motor vehicle, private motor vehicle.
I think incentivizing using public transport or, incentivizing not using your vehicle is a viable avenue in terms of getting people to reduce the amount of vehicles that they purchase and, their willingness to purchase a private vehicle. Definitely, fixing the inefficiencies in the public transportation system. I don't take a bus, but if a bus were available to me on a timely schedule, I would take a bus. And so, it's having people understand that, this is a viable mode of transportation that's going to get you to work on time. There's not going to be any issues, there's not going to be any breakdowns. And it's having people trust our transportation system a little bit more would prevent them from purchasing a private vehicle, I think.
Also, once you have kids, sorry,
go ahead, man.
Yeah.
The delay.
No, I was just saying, once you have kids in this country as well, because our school system isn't zoned and there's no kind of school transportation system. I mean, I was a single car household until we had kids. So, I mean, once you have children, so, there's a holistic approach that needs to be addressed, if it's zoning the schools and putting, school bus system in place, improving the public transportation sector, and then reducing the demand on the private motor vehicle. I used to work in Barataria, and anytime I had a meeting in Port of Spain, I used to take a ride share because parking is a nightmare in Port of Spain. So the absence of parking actually forced me to be more efficient with my transportation, to get to and from meetings in the city, which is also an interesting way of looking at it.
Again, because it goes back to that balance thing, that whole thing about parking and the city. That's one of the big things, because people are like, oh, we need to build more parking. The city doesn't have enough parking. I'm like, no, the city actually needs less parking. Because if the city has less parking and we build up the public transportation system and we create it in such a way that people feel safe and comfortable, because those are the two main things. You have to feel, it has to be reliable, it has to be safe, and it has to be comfortable. Once you clock those three things, it doesn't matter how, people always talk about modes and they talk about, rapid rail and all these different things. And people ask me, people always, when they find out what I do, the first question I get is, so what do you think about rapid rail? And what do I think about rapid rail? I think that what is the problem that we are trying to solve? And are there other ways that we could solve it that are less capital intensive and less infrastructurally invasive? And the answer to that is yes. That's what I think about rapid rail. But it comes from, you have to think about these things holistically. And that's one of the things that I think we struggle with a little bit, because we're so focused on like this mode, this immediate problem. But the thing that we need to focus on is reliability, comfort, and safety. Those are the three things. Once you get those three things correct, people will use public transportation.
I love what you said earlier. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I love what you said earlier about health as well.
Yeah, because I mean that's a secondary thing. But one of the things, for example, when we're talking about education, one of the things that people don't think about car ownership is how much it costs, because they don't actually add up all of the costs of what it takes to own a car. So one of the things, when I was forced to buy a car, and I use the word forced, when I was forced to buy a car, when I moved back to Trinidad, I looked around and I said, okay, I'm going to buy the cheapest car I can. So I bought, an inexpensive car. And I was like, right, this is the cost of the car. And then over the years, you pay for maintenance, you pay for insurance, you pay for repairs, you pay for tires and batteries and gas and parking and all these other things. And then when you actually add up what you have spent on that car, you think that it's inexpensive, but it's actually the most expensive thing you have, and it's losing you money every single day. But we don't see it that way.
Just have one final question for Hasani, actually, from Timothy D. Newton, just because we have to wrap in about 3 minutes. Hasani, has Tesla been able to find a balance in their groundbreaking technology with the sourcing of the materials for the components of their systems. So like their batteries, for example.
Okay. So what Tesla has done, and it's funny that you mentioned that. What Tesla, I recently read this. What Tesla has done is they have invested heavily in recycling technology, right? So what they are planning to do is create the facility to recycle all of the batteries that they use. So they are creating a closed loop system for themselves, and that can be expanded to a global solution for everybody who has an EV. You know, if we considering the fact that most people will adopt the EV technology. But yeah, Tesla has been able to find a balance, and they have actually been working to cut down the cost of creating a battery, right? And what COVID-19 has done again is created a capital shift. The capital markets have shifted because oil and gas now is a bit risky for investors, and so they're transferring their money to more renewable energy sources because it's a business. We're in the business of living. Life is about consumption, and so they have transferred their money to all of these renewable energy source companies, and so Tesla now has more money. Their stock price has skyrocketed. They have more money to invest in innovating. So it's a positive feedback loop in that as they continue to get more money, they are going to be more innovative and produce cheaper rather batteries. So I would say yes, they have been able to find a balance. And as a matter of fact, just to add to that point, in Australia, in the summer months when they experience these blackouts, I think it's the southern part of Australia. The owner of Tesla, Elon Musk, actually was on Twitter, and he made a bet with one of these Australian politicians that he could produce a battery-powered power station in 100 days, or it would be free, right? And Tesla had succeeded in producing that battery-powered plant, and so far there have not been any blackouts in Australia. So their technology is both reliable and they are cutting down the cost. So to answer your question, yes, they have been able to find a balance.
I think they're also trying to optimize extraction and manufacturing. I think they have a new plant now in, is it Nevada, where
Yes.
they're extracting material using salt, that goes into their manufacturing, and so they're reducing the kind of transportation footprint of their own extraction and manufacturing process as
Right.
well, which goes towards the overall embodied carbon in their process, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think we don't talk enough about that, about transportation of the inputs and the raw materials and all that stuff, and where these things come from and how transporting them has an impact as well. And I mean, we talk about inputs, but also things like outputs. The food security panel, I believe it was last week, they talk a lot about local cuisines and using local ingredients. And one of the things that does help do is reduce our carbon footprint, because if we're using things that are here, you know what I mean? It means that we're not flying them in or shipping them in from all over the place. You know what I mean? We're saving ourselves a great deal, both in terms of the finance and in terms of the greenhouse gases. Because if we're shipping lobsters from the northeast of the U.S. rather than like catching them in our backyard right here, you know what I mean? That has an impact. That does something. So we talked. I mean, that's in the context of food, but you could apply that to basically any supply chain. If the more inputs and outputs are circulating within the same geographic space, the better it is.
Great, immense. Well, it looks like we have to wrap now. We just found out that was the last question. But I just want to say an immense thank you to the panel for what has been such a lively and informative and inspiring conversation. I'm pretty sure the audience agrees with me because we just had this nonstop flurry of questions. But I certainly learned something today. I hope they did too. And at this point, I just want to thank our panelists hugely for their time and dedication and for sharing their wealth of knowledge with all of us. And just a few closing remarks and reminders about the festival. So the next event after this, the festival itself, is going to begin on Thursday, October 29th, live on Facebook. Where to find more information for the festival, you can register or watch the films for free at greenscreen.film. You could follow on Instagram at greenscreent, like on Facebook at greenscreent, and of course subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is, if you actually just go to YouTube and search for Green Screen Environmental Film Festival. And again, we just want to thank our sponsors, This year's festival is being hosted with the support of lead sponsor, the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, and supporting sponsor SwimCall and patron Film TT. Again, a huge thank you to our panelists and to the green screen team who are working assiduously behind the scenes as well. And many thanks to the audience tonight for this engaging conversation. Thank you again, and we'll see all of you at Green Screen next week.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a
Bye.
good day.
Guys.
Thanks, Giselle. Thanks for the excellent moderation.